Every system reaches a moment where it stops working, not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, not with an explosion, with hesitation. Decisions take longer, promises feel thinner, rules still exist, but fewer people believe in them. And when that moment arrives, the system doesn't ask for permission to change. It changes anyway. Most people think collapse looks like chaos, like streets on fire, like institutions vanishing overnight. But that's not how systems actually die. They rot, slowly, internally, while still pretending to function. And when a system finally fails, it is never replaced by nothing. It is replaced by something more controlled, more concentrated, more efficient at enforcing behavior. That replacement doesn't arrive announcing itself as power. It arrives calling itself order. To understand what always replaces a failed system, you have to stop thinking emotionally and start thinking structurally. Systems don't exist to make life fair. They exist to coordinate behavior at scale. Every system, financial, political, social, exists to answer the same three questions. Who gets access? Who enforces rules? Who decides when exceptions are allowed? As long as those three questions have clear answers, a system survives, even if people hate it. Systems don't fail because they're cruel. They fail when those answers become unclear, when enforcement weakens, when access becomes unpredictable, when authority fragments. That is when replacement begins. The first thing that always replaces a failed system is concentration of power. Not because leaders want it, because fragmentation feels dangerous. When systems wobble, people don't ask for freedom. They ask for stability. They ask for certainty. They ask for someone to take responsibility. So decision-making collapses inward. Committees become executives. Executives become councils. Councils become singular authorities. Choices shrink. Options narrow. And what once required consensus now requires permission. This doesn't feel like oppression when it happens. It feels like relief. People accept tighter control because uncertainty is exhausting. They don't notice the shift because it happens in increments, small changes, temporary measures, emergency powers that quietly outlive the emergency. This is why replacement systems are so effective. They don't need force, they use fatigue. Once power concentrates, the second replacement follows automatically, control of meaning. When systems are stable, truth can be debated. When systems are failing, truth becomes destabilizing. Because if people fully understand what's happening, cooperation breaks down, so language changes, words soften, failures are reframed. Losses become transitions, restrictions become safeguards, control becomes responsibility. This isn't propaganda in the loud sense, it's normalization. A slow re-education of expectation. People aren't told they are losing freedom. They're told freedom has become irresponsible. They're not told systems are failing. They're told systems are evolving. And because the language sounds reasonable, most people adapt without resistance. The system doesn't silence dissent, it absorbs it. Criticism becomes data, opposition becomes feedback. And once resistance is integrated, it stops being dangerous. At this point, people believe the system is being repaired, but repair is not what's happening. What's happening is restructuring, and restructuring requires the third replacement, direct behavioral management. When old incentives fail, behavior must be guided manually. Money loses influence, trust loses power, institutions lose authority. So access becomes conditional, participation becomes selective, compliance becomes required for normal life. Not enforced violently, enforced quietly, through eligibility, through approvals, through systems people rely on to function. This is the most misunderstood phase of replacement, because people believe control always arrives through force. In reality, it arrives through dependency. When survival depends on participation, resistance becomes self-punishing. People don't obey because they are threatened. They obey because opting out is too costly. This is how replacement systems stabilize faster than old ones ever did. They don't need belief, they need cooperation. And cooperation becomes automatic when daily life depends on it. By the time this phase is complete, the old system is effectively gone. But most people don't realize it, because nothing feels broken anymore. Things work, smoothly, predictably, efficiently. That's when the final replacement locks in. A new hierarchy, not louder, not more visible, not necessarily wealthier, but more embedded. Every failed system produces a smaller group with disproportionate leverage, not because they planned collapse, but because they understood the transition early. They positioned themselves near control points. They aligned with the new structure before it was obvious. By the time the public adapts, the hierarchy is already permanent. This is why revolutions rarely change outcomes. They change faces, not mechanics. Because systems don't get replaced by opposites. They get replaced by optimized versions of themselves, more centralized, more efficient, more controlled, and always justified as necessary. People don't invite these replacements because they want power over them. They invite them because they want life to feel normal again. That's the trap. Replacement systems feel like solutions, and solutions are hard to resist when you're exhausted by instability. Most people never see the replacement happen. They simply wake up inside it. And once you're born into a system, it feels permanent, natural, inevitable. But no system is permanent. They all decay. They all consolidate. They all replace themselves. The danger isn't collapse. The danger is believing replacement equals repair. Because once people stop paying attention, control completes itself quietly. And the next system locks in, until it too begins to fail. Once a replacement system takes hold, something crucial changes. People stop comparing the present to the past. They start comparing it only to chaos. That shift is everything. Because when chaos becomes the reference point, control feels like mercy. This is how replacement systems stop being questioned. They don't convince people they are good. They convince people they are better than the alternative. And once that comparison is accepted, the system no longer needs to justify itself. It only needs to exist. This is the moment replacement becomes permanent. Not legally, psychologically. People begin to internalize the new rules, not because they agree with them, but because resisting them feels pointless. Futility replaces outrage, and futility is far more powerful than fear. Fear can provoke reaction. Futility produces silence. At this stage, people stop asking, why? They start asking, how do I survive inside this? That question marks the true lock-in, because once survival replaces critique, the system wins. Replacement systems do not rely on violence to maintain control. They rely on self-regulation. People police themselves. They adjust behavior preemptively. They anticipate consequences without being told. They censor themselves without being threatened. This is the most efficient form of control ever created, because enforcement becomes invisible. No one feels oppressed. They feel managed, guided, protected. And protection is a powerful justification. Replacement systems thrive on the promise of safety, not absolute safety. Just enough safety to make risk feel irresponsible. And once risk is framed as irresponsible, experimentation disappears. Once experimentation disappears, alternatives die. And once alternatives die, permanence sets in. This is why replacement systems are so difficult to remove. They don't crush opposition, they starve it. Opposition withers when it has no oxygen. And oxygen is possibility. Replacement systems also reshape time itself. In failing systems, people still imagine long futures. In replacement systems, the future becomes abstract, distant, unreachable. People stop thinking in terms of generations. They think in terms of compliance cycles, approval periods, eligibility windows. The future becomes something managed by the system, not shaped by individuals. This subtle change is devastating, because people who cannot imagine the future cannot build it. They can only wait for it. Replacement systems love waiting. Waiting is passive. Waiting is obedient. Waiting transfers agency upward. Another mechanism that locks people in permanently is fragmentation. Replacement systems divide people into categories, not overtly, functionally. Different rules for different groups, different access levels, different permissions. This fragmentation prevents collective resistance. People experience the system differently, so they cannot unite against it. One group is stable, another is restricted, another is dependent, another is excluded. Each group believes the system is either working or almost working. No group experiences the whole picture. And without a shared experience, there is no shared response. This is how systems maintain control without unity. Division is not always ideological. Often it's administrative, procedural, technical. And technical divisions feel neutral. They don't trigger emotional resistance. They feel like bureaucracy. But bureaucracy is one of the most powerful tools of permanence. Because it drains energy without creating obvious enemies, replacement systems also rewrite morality. What was once unacceptable becomes necessary. What was once criticized becomes praised. What was once resistance becomes irresponsibility. People begin enforcing these moral shifts on each other, not because they were instructed to, but because aligning with the system feels safer than standing apart. This is when social pressure replaces authority. And social pressure is relentless. No police force is as effective as peer enforcement. Once morality is rewritten, replacement systems no longer need justification. They become the default. And defaults are rarely questioned. Over time, memory fades. People who live before the replacement age out. New generations are born into the system. They do not experience it as control. They experience it as reality. They do not ask what changed. They ask why anyone would want change at all. This is when the system becomes invisible. And invisible systems are the strongest ones, because what you cannot see, you cannot challenge. Replacement systems also benefit from exhaustion. People are tired of instability, tired of uncertainty, tired of transitions. So even when cracks appear in the new system, people resist acknowledging them. They don't want another change, another shift, another adjustment. Stability, even flawed stability, becomes sacred. This is how replacement systems survive, long enough to become the next failing system. Because no system is immune, replacement systems do not end the cycle. They continue it. They simply reset the clock. Over time, the same pressures return, complexity increases, flexibility decreases, control tightens, innovation slows, trust erodes, and once again, the system stops working. But by then, the population is already conditioned to accept replacement. Not revolt, not reform, replacement. This is the most unsettling truth. Most people do not live through collapse. They live through transitions they barely notice. They don't wake up one day in a new system. They slide into it, one adjustment at a time, one temporary measure at a time, one exception that becomes permanent. By the time anyone realizes the system has changed fundamentally, there's no clear way back. Because the path back requires energy, unity, imagination, and risk tolerance. And replacement systems are designed to drain all four. This is why systems are rarely overthrown from within once replacement is complete. Change does not come from opposition, it comes from exhaustion of the system itself. Eventually, the replacement system accumulates too many contradictions, too many dependencies, too much rigidity, and it begins to fail the same way the previous one did, quietly, internally, while pretending to function. And the cycle begins again, not because people are foolish, but because incentives are powerful. Fear favors control, exhaustion favors stability, uncertainty favors authority. Replacement systems do not need villains. They only need tired people. Understanding this does not make you cynical. It makes you aware. Awareness does not break systems, but it changes how you move inside them. It changes what you believe. It changes what you expect. An expectation shapes behavior. This channel exists to explain these transitions, not to frighten, not to predict dates, but to show patterns. Because once you see the pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it. And once you unsee it, you stop mistaking replacement for repair. You stop confusing order with progress. You stop believing stability means health. And that alone changes everything. Because the most powerful systems are not the ones that control people. They are the ones people mistake for inevitability. And inevitability only exists until it is understood.